Every time it looks like Denji is beginning to claw his way towards happiness, Fujimoto just rips it out of his hands and he feeds it to the fire itself. Chainsaw Man chapter 214, it isn't just another loss, it is a moment where love, it begins to die. Despair begins to take the wheel, and Chainsaw Man himself finally steps out the cage, becoming the true monster that we all know Denji can tap into once he's been pushed too far. Chainsaw Man chapter 214 pushes Denji's narrative further into that narrative cycle that has defined his character since the very beginning, if we're honest. Every step is headed towards healing and finding love, and it is violently undone, and it leaves him in despair. Once again, Fujimoto, he's framing Denji's transformation into his most terrifying and unhinged form, not as a power-up that is born from hope itself, but instead as the result of yet another unbearable loss. This chapter makes it clear, the closer Denji becomes towards building true human connections, the more brutal their destruction ultimately becomes, and the more devastating his return to Chainsaw Man's raw, godlike horror truly becomes. And it makes those questions about which side will Denji choose, being human or devil, that much more interesting. It looks like the world is trying to force Denji, whichever decision he ends up making in terms of the direction of his character. It's going to be a heartbreaking road either way. So let's go ahead and unpack this chapter by starting first off with Denji's cycle of despair. So from part 1 onward, Denji's growth, it has been tied directly to the people he allows himself to love. With Aki in power, he discovered the type of family that he had never really known. With Makima, he chased the dream of intimacy, only to be shattered by her betrayal. With Nayuta in part 2, it seemed to offer him something precious, a fragile return to a normal life, one that was tied to his promise to protect her both as a guardian as well as a brother, as well as a pseudo-father figure in a way. But chapter 214, it underscores that really huge reoccurring truth with Denji. Fujimoto, as of right now, is not going to let Denji find a happy peace. The brutal death of Nayuta, it reopened wounds in Denji that never truly fully healed several dozens of chapters ago when he transformed. It stripped him of the fragile dream of the happiness that he clung to. Now, in this chapter following Yoshida's death, it compounds that pain. Fujimoto is doubling down on that motif. Whenever it looks like Denji's beginning to stabilize, the bonds that are anchoring him are violently ripped away. Despair, not hope, becomes a trigger to unleash him in terms of his deepest, most destructive self right when the narrative needs him the most to do it. And I did think that using Yoshida as a narrative catalyst was a very bold decision, just given where the relationship was prior to this. But then when you really sit down and think about it, it kind of makes sense, just the way that guys are wired. You know, we can sit there and argue and shit post at each other and call each other names, etc. And then you bring out the pizza and the Cokes and the beers or whatever it is you have with the pizza when you're with your friends, and you make up and everything's good. Denji and Yoshida, they shared a meal together basically. Denji was the one doing all the eating, but they basically made up, and Denji got to, for a time, look like he had made a true friend. A shady friend, but a true friend nonetheless. Yoshida's death being done in this way, it serves a essential narrative function. Throughout part 2, Yoshida was positioning himself both as an ally and an enemy and an enigma, a figure who understands Chainsaw Man's place in the world and the danger of also letting Denji and his irresponsible ways run unchecked. By ending his story here, Fujimoto reframes Yoshida not as a lasting mentor or brother, but as another cog in that machinery of despair known as Denji's life. When Barem then shows up and he torches Yoshida's corpse, the weight isn't just in Yoshida's end, it's also in what the loss of his life does to Denji. Yoshida's presence, in a way, it offered Denji a uneasy link to stability in a very twisted way when you sit down and think about the relationship. A reminder that not all forces around him were hostile. Maybe they all had their own different ambitions and desires. People that are around Denji tend to use him, but Yoshida did represent that there could be something else there as well. His death, it tears away that last threat that Denji has, or rather one of the last threats, because Mitaka is still there. Denji has lost Nayuta. He has now lost Yoshida in a very short period of time. And now the last thing standing before him is Barem, the man who is responsible for those losses. The narrative has set the stage for Denji's despair to sharpen into an unrelenting rage, and when he transforms, we see it on full display. This is basically catharsis and brutality on display. Denji versus Barem. It is brutal, and it is every bit as justifyingly cruel as you would expect. The moment that Denji's intestine scarf lashes out to seize Barem, it is a pure catharsis. The Flamethrower Hybrid, he begins with smug detachment, mocking his own fate, saying, hey, you should kill me first because this kind of hurts, dude. But then the shift from sarcasm into agony happens, and it isn't just Barem's downfall, it's also a very satisfying payoff for readers. Denji finally gets to annihilate the man who murdered Nayuta, who murdered his pets, who burned down his home. The things that you could argue were anchoring him towards humanity, especially when you consider that Meowie, the pet that he got from Power, was one of those pets that was killed. It is a brutal and grotesque act of vengeance, one that feels far more personal than any of Denji's prior battles. This was one-sided, but it was also something that really has a rich payoff. There's no grand ideological clash, no hero saves the day moment. This is a personal loss answered with raw, unflinching violence and vengeance. For Denji, this victory, it should feel like closure, yet Fujimoto, in the way that he's drawing it, it ensures instead that this moment truly just opens up another wound. He's closing one chapter, but he's also opening up a wound on himself figuratively by granting Denji the satisfaction of vengeance before throwing him into the eye of an even greater threat. The manga, it is escalating his despair to unprecedented levels, and being blunt, that's just smart writing. This looming new devil is about to descend, and it has big shoes to follow because it's coming after the darkness devil. Just as Denji is consuming Barem, the chapter pivots to that final revelation. A door in the sky opens up, followed by countless others flooding into the heavens itself, or flooding from the heavens. This imagery recalls the sheer existential dread that the Darkness Devil's introduction had. When the Darkness Devil appeared, the rules of Chainsaw Man, it basically shifted in a way. Its mere presence, it shattered the bravado of even the strongest characters. It made someone like Makima look mortal for the first time. It left scars that lingered on people like Denji and Power long after. For Fujimoto, this raises the stakes enormously. Any new devil introduced at this point, it's got to live up to the legacy of the Darkness Devil. The Falling Devil kind of did so in its own way, but now, given these circumstances with Denji in a situation where he's in that proper Chainsaw Man form with the intestine wrapped around his neck, now whatever devil this is has to be a big badass. It has to be an embodiment of a primal fear whose very existence basically feels unwinnable. By choosing to frame this new entity's arrival in such an apocalyptic fashion, doors blotting out the sky, hell itself bleeding into reality, Fujimoto is signaling to us as readers that we are about to witness a threat capable of greater, or at the bare minimum, comparable magnitude. This devil doesn't just threaten Denji's survival, it, in a way, you could argue, threatens his very psyche. Denji is already cracked wide open with this new loss. His pain, it is exploited to fuel Chainsaw Man's true form right now. Facing a new devil that embodies a fear on a cosmic scale potentially could shatter whatever humanity has left, or at the very least, if there are health bars, bring it down to the very last health bar. Denji's tragedy is basically power at the cost of love itself, and that's what makes him such a beautiful character. Chainsaw Man Chapter 214 highlights that central tragedy and irony to Denji's journey. The more that he loves, the more that he loses, the more powerful and more broken Chainsaw Man becomes. Yoshida's death, Barem's brutal execution, the ominous arrival of this new devil, they are all gears in Fujimoto's machine of despair that the narrative has. Denji's victory, it rings hollow because it only pushes him deeper into that cycle. Yes, he avenged Nayuta, he avenged his pets, he avenged Yoshida, but at the cost of losing yet another bond in the form of Yoshida. His rage, it is justified. His catharsis, it is visceral. But the chapter ends with no sense of relief in a way, only dread and anticipation for what's coming next week. Denji has once again been stripped of love and pushed into the role of a weapon, wielded by despair itself. That's what makes the cost of Chainsaw Man's true power so heartbreaking. Chapter 214, it ain't just a violent spectacle, it's a thematic echo of Denji's entire story. Each time he reaches towards humanity, Fujimoto just yanks it away, leaving him a little bit more lonely, a little bit angrier, a little bit more monstrous when he's in that Chainsaw Man form. Yoshida's death, it wasn't random shock value. It's another turn in the screw designed to push Denji into that truest power he has. Barem's demise, it offers a short-lived catharsis, but the looming devil ensures that despair, it isn't over yet. For Denji, power doesn't come from love, but instead from destruction and despair, basically making him the opposite of what you expect from a shonen protagonist. As chapter 214 makes painfully clear, the more he loses, the more unstoppable, more unstable, more broken Chainsaw Man truly becomes. This chapter truly proves, if anything, is that Denji's heart is a curse. Every bond he makes only sharpens Chainsaw Man's teeth that he uses to devour devils. And with that new devil tearing open the sky with that door that is there, the nightmare has only begun. And while you wait for the next chapter to drop, dive into more Chainsaw Man breakdowns here on Anime Explained, because this story, this despair, it never ends, and neither do the discussions.